applications. So he reads XML files, he reads Java sources, he extracts annotations, he reads SQL queries, and he builds a model in Moose, in Smalltalk, and does some pretty crazy stuff with this information. So you might be interested to have a look at his work.
Definitely.
Hello. Okay. So this is interesting, and I might have a lot of general questions, but if we're going to buy into the JEE Kool-Aid and say that we want to adapt that, this actually doesn't sound that difficult to me. You talk about this as a big effort that would, too big for any one company, and in the sense of completely standardizing it, obviously, yes, it would. But most of these pieces, I think, are not that difficult. I mean, you mentioned RMI. RMI, we had a co-op student do in a week in a previous job, and most of it is RMI over IIOP anyway, so it's essentially there. I don't know. The vague topic of making the servers scalable and robust is perhaps a big thing, but it seems to me that if a company had this as their business case, they could put a couple of bright people on it for 6 months and have an awfully good start.
Right? Do you hear me still? Okay. Strange microphone. Yeah, you're right. Actually, I was trying to make a go and have a sketch of the container architecture and everything else before the ESUG ready in 2 months, except that I got completely eaten up by other tasks. Yeah, that's true. The basic sketches, the basic implementation of it is not too terribly complicated. What makes it complicated is, and that's why I said it needs to be done by the community, it needs to be adapted, it needs to be used. If it's not an accepted, community-accepted general architecture that from then on many projects on the server side are using, then this is a waste. Then this would be just a single tool for one company. It needs to be discussed and worked through by the community, so the community should feel okay using this and adapting it, because otherwise some of the positive effects, being standardized, having tools and frameworks, don't come. And you should know that you should never underestimate the effort of doing tooling after you've done the technology. Okay? Anybody else? Yeah, yes, one question. Shout.
Just regarding your point about inversion of control and dependency injection, a lot of my Java friends, and I've worked with a number of them, there's been a bit of a backlash against that because you get all of these kind of bean injection things, and it's very difficult to know what's being injected where, especially in large systems. And so in many respects, a lot of them are going back to the what's wrong with a constructor and just being explicit about what gets composed with what. So I'd almost beg you not to introduce that and just introduce like a pattern for create your objects this way. I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with injecting composable pieces. In fact, it's probably something that came from Smalltalk ages ago. But more just set the standard and do it, and just don't have kind of little pragmas that inject bits in, hard to find places. It really is hard to maintain.
Well, that must be Spring people, because the Spring people started with dependence injection very early, and they did it all in XML files, and this was a complete pain in the behind. It was like visual programming. You have two sides of your program not seeable at the same time, so you never know what's going to be injected and how it's configured. You have to always swap between Java code and XML files. And today, the standard advice for young people starting in this area is to write annotations because they're very explicit of what's going on and take them as a default documentation. And for the deployment bit, and believe me, in JEE, it's maybe 1% of the annotations, change them in the XML files to override their behavior in a very specific sense. So the injection annotations, the pragmas, are as explicit as calling a constructor. Well, in the example I gave with the entity manager, the persistency handling object, you really don't want to know at that place how you create this object. Believe me, you don't want this. So either you need to have a factory behavior that you call upon, and then you are as indirect as this injection, because the injection is nothing else but a meta-programming step using a factory supplied by the container who has all the context information to create this entity manager. So there's
just construct your object with something that requires those services, and then ask that object to do it. Why do you need all of the kind of the meta stuff to do that? I can just be explicit and say, I'm an object, you need to give me a persistence thing, and I will communicate through that persistence thing. You don't really need all of this kind of meta stuff. You just
that would be the
compose it.
same like asking the container to do it.
Have a good design. I mean, if you have a good design, you don't need dependency injection. You don't need annotations. For example, annotations for saying that I'm going to use this class as a stateful is coupling your class, that to that thing. I mean, you will always use that class or the instances of that class as stateful or stateless. So where's the reuse? I mean, you want to use that in another situation. You don't want to use a stateless. You want to use a stateful. You cannot, because you have the annotation that doesn't allow you the same thing, annotation for persistence. Then you decide, you put the annotations in the class saying, I'm going to map this instance variable as a one-to-one mapping, but then you cannot use it in another way. So, I think most of the solutions that Java people provide, design solutions that they provide, is because of the mistakes they made. They are not really good design solutions, and that's my opinion. Of course, not everybody has to agree.
Okay.
Well, I think that there are two sides to that thing. What Andreas is saying is that EJB have won the market. So how do we run after that? How could we try to get a share of that? And I think it's a good idea to just be open, even if we know some of the design decisions aren't the right ones or aren't the ones that we would take today. But I think it's important to think about why people like that. I mean, as Andreas showed, it's really easy to write an EJB, and it's going to provide something. Nobody's asking for maintenance or quality of code in that case. It's just big enterprises are using that stuff. I like the idea of going into that direction and to try and catch up with that. I guess we should just discuss the things and see how far we want to go in that direction. It's no good just having better answers that nobody wants to hear, and that's the problem we have here. And that's probably exactly what you wanted to say. You just wanted to open a discussion.
Yeah, I'm cut off. Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Well, that's a good conclusion.